This is Lightning Power Lunch on the Lightning Audio Network with Dave Mishkin and Greg Linnelli.
I think it's the defense. I think, especially in playoff, everything comes from defense, comes from winning battles, and just being greasy. I think that's very important.
You can tell by looking at the numbers. I think we're like top 5 in the league in like goal against. So it's all great team effort this season on the defensive side, and so it's all them. So big thanks.
I mean, to have, he's won scoring race a couple times in a row now. He just keeps extending his own records, and to be able to put the point totals he's putting up year after year, and then go in the playoffs, and he has some of the best statistics in the playoffs of all time. And that's how you build cases for Hall of Famers, is to be able to, you're not a one-hit wonder, you're a one-decade wonder. And he's going to be more than that. So it's impressive, and probably a big reason why we've had the success we've had over the years.
Some games have been happening over the last couple of days, which we're going to get into. Dave Mishkin on the other side. Partner, good to be with you. And as we get ready for a big week of Lightning Panthers.
Yeah. Did you have a nice weekend? Happy Easter to you,
Happy
belatedly
Easter to you
so.
as well. It was nice. Family and I went to Mass yesterday, and then I guess you'd call it early dinner.
Mm-hmm.
We went to a winery out in Ocala that we like to go
Starting
to.
the kids young, huh?
Starting the kids young. They had a live band. They actually brought up my kids to sing.
Okay.
And
that's why you fed them wine.
I needed the wine.
I'm kidding, of course.
But that was fun.
Family services.
Hey.
Disregard what I just said.
Come at me.
The
Come at
Linnelli
me.
children were not inebriated on Easter
Listen,
Sunday.
in Italy, that would be considered starting too late. At 9.
Well, how young do the kids start getting the wine at Mass?
The little wine.
Because they get grape juice, right?
Yeah. So she's done the communion, so she's already technically had it.
They give them actual wine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but and this is going down a deep rabbit hole. The host is actually. It also can be considered taking the wine as well. It's 1 and 2. I'm not going to get into all of the meaning behind that, but if you
they don't get a
wine,
bottle,
they don't get a bottle. That's right. That's right.
Amount.
They don't have not to give Enzo, but here we are. I know you had some fun this weekend.
Yeah,
talking a little lighting and kind of getting ready.
Bobby Fenton on Saturday, Jay Retcher on Sunday. So
beautiful.
We launched the weekend power lunch, which will continue as long as the Lightning are playing in the playoffs. This is the last series to start. We knew that.
Yeah.
Tonight, Monday, there are 2 series that have not yet started that are starting, and 2 other series that have already started.
Yep.
They're having their game 2s. And then some of the series that started yesterday have game 2 tomorrow, and they'll be playing actually before the Lightning drop the puck with the Panthers. Panthers aren't even here yet. I mean, the Lightning had practice. I'm at Amalie Arena in our studios. By here, I mean in Tampa. So they're going to come in tomorrow, as you would expect. And it's going to be a late face-off, too, which I don't think really matters to the players and may matter to the fans. Those that have to wake up early and go to work on Wednesday, it may be a late night. We'll see. But the playoffs are off and running, and I mean, I don't know. We can talk a little bit about what we've seen so far, because I think 2 things have jumped out at me already in some of the games that have been played, Greg. One is for the teams that have been victorious, not a direct line that every big play has come from their top players for the winning teams. But when you look at the end of the night, Winnipeg wins. Kyle Connor has a huge goal, 3 points. Colorado wins. Nathan McKinnon has 3 points. The Toronto Maple Leafs beat Ottawa. The big 4, the core 4,
Come on,
every
core
one
four.
of them had
Core four,
multiple
Dave.
points, right? So this notion of your best players need to lead the way, at least early in the playoffs, we are seeing that. I'm actually going to go to the playoff stats.
And
Early days,
specifically,
of course.
as you look that up, specifically with Toronto, it was the special teams that did Ottawa in. And
Yes.
we had talked about that before with the Lightning.
Absolutely.
And kind of taking away that big weapon for Toronto, who had traditionally struggled with their power play in the playoffs recently, at least in that game 1 against Ottawa. That should back them off a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go.
So that was the other thing. Even the teams that didn't get a lot of power play chances, the teams that won, maybe didn't get a lot of power play chances, but they converted on the power play. I mean, some teams were 2 for 2. I can go to that and look that up. But here are the top scorers so far in the playoffs. Marner, 3 points. Kyle Connor, 3 points. Mark Scheifele, who I would consider a key guy in Winnipeg, one of their top players, 3 points. Nathan McKinnon, 3 points. Then you get to the 2-point guys. Matthews is there. Nylander's there. Hurdle for Vegas had 2 points. Tavares had 2 points. Logan Stankoven had 2 goals. He was a pickup from Dallas in the Rantanen trade. He helped Carolina. On the losing side, Minnesota got 2 goals from Matt Boldy and 2 assists from Kaprizov. But we can see a correlation between teams that have won their game ones, and they've gotten, many of these teams, important contributions from their top players. And it also follows that if you were scoring the power play, probably your top players are contributing. So Toronto, you were right. Last year in a 7-game series against the Boston Bruins, the Maple Leafs scored a total of 1 power play goal in 7 games.
Right.
Yesterday, they scored 3 power play goals. And they far and away were, and again, I'm going to look this up to give you the exact numbers. They had more power play chances than most other teams have had so far. So as I go to power play in the playoffs, power play opportunities, the Maple Leafs had 6. They went 3 for 6. The next 2 closest teams, Winnipeg and Colorado, had 4. This is all after 1 game. Most teams are in the 3 to 2 range in terms of opportunities, which is not, no power play chances. But as you've often said, Greg, in the playoffs, the power play opportunities tend to dry up, especially after the first round. For the Leafs to get 6 power play chances in 1 game, I mean, if Ottawa has any chance of winning the series or even, being competitive in the series, they need to find a way to stay out of the box. But it wasn't only that the Leafs went 3 for 6 on the power play. If you watch the highlights of the goals that they scored in the power play, all 3 goals came just as the power play began. Well, the 2 of them that were 5-on-4, they had a 5-on-3. They scored 3 seconds into the 5-on-3. So they won a face-off, and a guy shot it, and either went in or it was tipped, or like the Knies goal was a rebound in front.
Right.
And we're hearing ourselves in stereo here.
You're good.
Thank you,
Maybe
Steve.
it's just,
Yeah. So Steve is juggling some balls here, but I hear just myself right now. So for Toronto, I think we solved the problem.
You got it.
A microphone was
need me
on
to
that
talk?
didn't need to be on. Yes. That was not me. That microphone was on. I just put my microphone on. But Toronto didn't just score in the power play. They scored immediately on the power play. It was a face-off win and an open look and a goal. So that's going to be a problem for Ottawa if they don't figure out how to stay out of the box more. And just generally in that game, if you watch the goals Toronto scored, 5 of the 6 goals, guys were basically right in prime scoring areas. And the last one was Morgan Riley threw a puck to the net, kind of like he scored against the Lightning in 2023. He just wristed pucks from the blue line, and this one hit off of Highmore's glove and went into the net. It was a little bit of a lucky goal for Toronto, but again, you got to limit scoring chances. If you give Toronto time and space to make plays, they will kill you. And their top guys did that.
Yep. And that's, kind of the other part about the playoffs. Sometimes, again, that first round can be unpredictable. I don't think you're going to see, specifically in the Toronto-Ottawa series, that many power play opportunities to Toronto. I do think as the series goes on, you tend to see that number come down if it's pretty high early on. It's almost like it's easier for the officials to call a high amount of power plays in the first couple of games and then basically say, I'm done. I'm good. Now it's on you guys. You can do what you want, but I'm kind of setting the tone. You'll hear that a little bit officiating-wise. And so I think Ottawa also, too, was interesting if you read the comments, partner, coming out of that loss, that a couple of them were like, yeah, definitely the postseason was a lot more intense than the regular season. It was almost like
they showed their inexperience.
Them by surprise.
Yeah,
Yes,
I mean, they took too many penalties, but they gave up too many chances in front of
Correct.
their own net. I mean, we can talk about Linus Ullmark and be like, oh my gosh, he's got to play better. And okay, fair enough.
And that's
like,
fair.
Maybe he
That's
needed
fair.
to give them saves, but if you look at the goals that were scored,
what are you going to do?
Prime looks right at the hash marks.
For sure.
And then, Marner has a breakaway for the second goal.
And Nylander, I think he just ripped.
Right, 5-on-3. I mean, 5-on-3, you're down 2 men,
That's
but they win the faceoff. He walks from the circle right into the slot and has an uncontested shot. So anyway, Otto's going to need to be better. I mean, when we talk about one team is experienced, one team isn't in the playoffs, Ottawa showed, I think, in how that game went, Ottawa showed its inexperience. Now, I have said on the show, I think it's going to be a competitive series. I may be proven wrong. I mean, Toronto may have 3 more wins that look just like this one. But for Ottawa to be competitive, they're going to have to bounce back from this, which is another part of doing well in the playoffs, having a short memory in terms of what went wrong and then correcting the problems and being better. So we'll see how they do in their second game.
Curious how, because I'm not sure there were any surprises the first game so far. I mean, I think.
Were you surprised that Colorado manhandled Dallas as much as
maybe manhandled?
They did?
Maybe to a degree.
5-1 in Dallas to me is manhandling.
I think that's fair. Am I surprised Colorado won? No. And look, if you were to say that Colorado is going to split, I don't think you'd be completely off your rocker to suggest that. So let's see how Dallas responds. I mean, I think. Would we be surprised if they win game 2? Probably not. I think even Ottawa having a better effort, even, Berube said afterwards, look, we know it's just one game. And we know it's going to be a bit different. And usually, that first game can be the outlier. And I think maybe that's kind of what we saw. What was interesting, and just to kind of bring it back to the Lightning at Bolts Radio, if people want to get involved in the conversation, it doesn't mean anything for us, but I think it's an interesting observation, is that everybody now, obviously before the playoffs, during the playoffs, before a round starts with the team, they're going to give you your predictions. Who's going to win, who's going to lose, and how many games. I would say the Athletic did, and we can get to the specific numbers because I think it was somebody who reached out to us via X this weekend. I don't know if you got to it, but they had mentioned, I think it was something like 18 out of 24 writers or broadcasters pick the Lightning to beat Florida in the first round. Now, you and I, we're not going to let that cloud our judgment in terms of how this series is going to go. We'll call balls and strikes the way we see it. I thought, one, that was an interesting number. It maybe speaks to more people the perception of Tampa Bay coming into the playoffs and how good they are and how good they've been. I also think this is one of those where the injury bug for Florida might be playing into that narrative a bit more than we think with certain people. I also have an interesting opinion on broadcasters and people who are actually covering the game on a national perspective. More on the game calls, giving predictions on games. We can kind of get into that in a little bit.
You think that they shouldn't be doing predictions if they're
calling? I actually
calling.
don't. And let me be very clear. I don't think it's not going to impact how I watch a game. I've never done that. Whenever I've seen a national broadcaster call a local game for the team I was covering, or when I was a fan watching, I always was like, yeah, you know what, that must be a pretty big game. John Madden's calling a game, that's a pretty big game. Or Dick Enberg, that's a big game. I do think in today's polarized world that we do live in, I think the national broadcasts, even though I think for the most part they do a pretty good job, I think you and I have a lot of respect for the announcers and what they do, because I think it's hard to appease both fan bases. I think that they're a lightning rod for criticism anyways. I mean, we take enough tweets over the years where I can't believe the national broadcast is just not giving Kucherov
Well, it's not going to be
credit.
slanted. It's not going to be slanted toward one team or the other.
Right. So I actually think, though, not only to avoid that unwarranted criticism, I think if you're calling a game, you shouldn't predict who's going to win.
Right.
I think you should just call the game, because I think whether you agree with it or not, subconsciously in the back of your mind, if you go into a series thinking, I like the Lightning in 6, I do think that gets into the analysis a little bit, because you want to be proven right. Everybody wants to be proven right. And that's why they do these picks. They want your expert analysis. They want your take.
Shouldn't call it clickbait, but it is an easily digestible read to get a sense of what people think.
And understand, I think you and I are trained well enough where if we are watching a game, but I mean, obviously we're working that, so it doesn't impact a great deal. But if we read about it, or we have somebody on who's calling the game to talk about it on our show, and we get the sense that they're really in favor of the Lightning and they think the Lightning are going to win, I don't think that's going to judge or cloud our judgment of that specific announcer. But I know there are a lot of fans who will. And they're very sensitive to that topic.
Yes.
And I think
want their teams to get love.
I like Ray Ferraro, I think, is a really good analyst. I think you're putting him in a tough spot, and he probably doesn't care. He's doing what he's told. But I think for the integrity of the broadcast, I would just kind of don't give me your opinion on it. Just call the game down the middle and let's have fun.
We had a fan last week ask us for our predictions, and I said, when the Lightning get in the playoffs, I used to write predictions. It's been a while since the Lightning missed the playoffs, right? I'm not sure if I did it in 2017, but I remember in the early 2010s when the Lightning were missing the playoffs, late 2000s, I would do kind of a series preview and I'd give a prediction. I just don't do that anymore. Certainly not in a series involving the Lightning. And I'm not even crazy about doing it for the other series. I mean, we talk about it a bit on the show, and what I will say is this team is going to be heavily favored for reasons A, B, and C. And for this team to buck the odds, this team is going to have to do A, B, and C.
Correct.
But that's different than saying 18 of 24 writers pick the Lightning, and I'm one of those writers, or I'm one of those pundits. So, look, I wouldn't put too much stock into it. I mean, I don't know what these writers, and I keep calling them writers. I mean, if it's Ray Ferraro, it's not just writers. It's people who cover the sport.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what their batting average is in a lot of these series, but I remember last week you said if people are picking the Lightning and saying the Lightning in 7, that basically is saying they don't know, right?
100%.
I mean, they're they're basically saying it's going to be a close series, and if it comes down to a 7th game, I'll take the home team.
That is correct.
And I think,
or if they don't,
without looking at it,
really,
I bet most of those people that we probably didn't see a lot of Lightning in 5 of those 18 that picked the Lightning. Probably most of them are Lightning in 7, maybe Lightning in 6. And for those who are picking the Panthers, they're probably Panthers in 6 or Panthers in 7. So that's why they play the games. This is going to be a tough series for the Lightning. There's no way around it, but it's going to be a tough opening series for the Panthers too.
Yeah, I think, sometimes we get into the weeds, and rightfully so. That's what we do. We like to look at the other team and the issues they may present to the Lightning to give our audience an idea of, okay, look, I think Sam Bennett's always a handful. I think in a series like this where it's going to be very physical, where guys send messages that last the whole series, and his ability to change the game the way he hits. I know he's one guy. He's going to be out there 15 to 17 minutes, maybe more, depending on the pace of the game. But he is somebody that can impact the game that you have to watch, in addition to, obviously, the Barkovs and the Reinhardts. Sam Bennett impacts a game differently. I think he is somebody that you need to watch and make sure you have eyes all around you, because I think he's that special of a player. He's not Tom Wilson. He may be Tom Wilson light, but those are the players that traditionally at times I think have given the Lightning a bit of a problem who are heavier that can impose their will. That doesn't mean the Lightning are going to shy away from contact and not handle it correctly, but it's something to keep an eye on.
Yeah.
But I think conversely, I think looking at the Lightning, if you're the Panthers, I think statistically this year might have been better defensively than some people thought. But I think whatever line Kucherov is on with Point is going to be a handful. And if Forsling has the opportunity to try and shut him down and that line down, I do think the Lightning's second line, if it's composed of Cirelli and Hagel and then somebody else, is going to be a handful for the opposing team. Because I think it's the way those two guys play is playoff-like. But now you have this added skill that they bring that I think a lot of teams are going to struggle with. And I think that, to me, forget about the third line, 11 and 7, that's all going to factor into this. I think how the Cirelli line does, not only defensively, because I think we know there's a certain standard there. What are they going to do offensively in this series against the Panthers? I think could be potentially a handful for Florida in this 7-game series. And I wouldn't say, again, that the Panthers are going to shy away from that. Obviously, they're not. But I think how they're going to handle that, I'm just wondering if they have enough horses on the back end, in addition to the forwards up front, to be able to contain them game in and game out.
Yeah, and we'll see how the matchups play out. I think when the Lightning have home ice, they are going to try and get Cirelli, Hagel, and Gensel as the third guy right now on that line, with McDonough and Chernak out against the Barkov line.
Right.
When the Panthers have home ice, we may see the Barkov line with Forsling for sure out against the point line. I mean, the Barkov line is kind of their Cirelli line. Barkov, as I mentioned, has won the Selke Trophy.
Yes.
I don't know if Paul Maurice is necessarily going to go with that matchup, but I wouldn't be surprised if he does. For sure, Forsling, whoever the right D partner is, it may change as Ekblad comes back into the lineup for Game 3, which will coincide with the Panthers having home ice for Games 3 and 4. Forsling for sure is going to be out against Kucherov, as much as they can get him out against Kucherov. And I don't know what the forward matchups are going to be, but when you talk about Cirelli and Hagel trying to do some damage offensively, they may be seeing different lines depending on whether the Lightning are at home or on the road. It may not be, the coaches may have their own idea about how they want the matchups to play out. And I know how John Cooper wants the matchups to play out. I'm not sure how Paul Maurice wants the matchups to play out. I do want to mention one other thing. We heard from a fan who wrote this in last week talking about how the Panthers love to dump and chase. And whatever it is, like they dump and chase more than any other team in the NHL, and they retrieve like 35%. I don't remember exactly the particulars of it. And I hadn't seen that data. And all I said was, well, that may be, but I do know Barkov will carry the puck in. I do know Sam Bennett will carry the puck in if he has an opportunity. So I heard a clip from Cirelli where Cirelli basically backed up what the fans said. The fans' data. Cirelli said, they do dump and chase a lot, more so than they did basically with the previous coach. He said when we played them a couple of years ago, they were more make plays off the rush. So understand that the Lightning have absorbed that, right? And they've also played against the Panthers. I confess, though, that just watching them, and I've seen them play 4 times this year live, so it's not like I've seen them play 80 times this year. And other people are tracking this data. And unlike some of the other elements, this is a fairly straightforward stat if somebody is tracking it. One team has the puck in the neutral zone. What are they doing? Are they carrying it in? Are they dumping it in? Sometimes the situation calls for a dump in, 2-on-2. Sometimes 3-on-2, it calls for not a dump in. You want to carry it in if you have an extra guy on the attack. So I believe that the numbers are accurate. All I am saying is that the Panthers, it's not like they dump and chase 100% of the time. I can assure you we will see Barkov carry the puck in because he's very, very good at protecting the puck. And his instinct is to make a play.
Yep.
But I think the fans' point was against a team that prioritizing dumping and chasing, maybe when you have a choice, the Panthers are coached to dump and chase. Unless you are sure that you can carry it in cleanly, dump and chase and win the puck battle.
Yep.
I think the fans' point was much of where this series takes place.
Yep.
May be predicated on the Lightning's ability or inability to win puck battles and then execute clears. They're going to be facing a team more so than other opponents. They're going to look to put the puck in the corner, come after you, try and dislodge the puck and get it back and make a play off a cycle rather than make a play off a rush.
Yeah. I think that's fair. I think all of that is fair. At Bolts Radio, if you want to get involved in the conversation. And, you know, the reasons I've seen some people who think the Lightning are going to win, whether it's in 6 or 7. I think James Myrtle, you know, you're going to start seeing a lot of different people weigh in with something to the extent of the Panthers.
And no offense to James Myrtle, who's a very good reporter. Like, he's in Toronto.
Right.
How much has he actually watched the Lightning and Panthers this year? And that's kind of the point. You're asking people, it's kind of like the voting for these awards. Like, how well do they actually know these teams?
Well, partner, that goes back to the whole national conversation about these picks at the beginning of the year, and you know, you giving me not you, these people.
Maybe
giving
James
me opinions.
Myrtle has. I don't mean to. It's not just him, but you know, maybe he's when the
It's
Leafs aren't
everybody.
playing, he's not
It's
covering
everybody.
the Leafs. He's watching the Lightning.
possibly-
He's watching the Panthers.
How can you possibly have a pulse, an accurate one, on every team in the National Hockey League? Now, look, some more than others, and I think some of that is fair. But I think with Myrtle, I think it's a situation where he's in Toronto. He's got to give an opinion, and that's fine. I get that. But also, his reasoning was the Panthers weren't playing well down the stretch, and they've got some injury issues.
According to Paul Maurice, though, they were playing well down the stretch. He liked how they played as they were losing some games on a road trip. They had a tough schedule down the stretch, a lot of back-to-backs. They kind of had what the Lightning had in January, and then they went home for a homestand. They played quite well. They continued to play quite well, and they won 3 of the 4 games. They lost to the Rangers in the final game, which locked them in to 3rd place. So I'm not sure I even agree with that. That's not me saying. I didn't watch them play, but Paul Maurice knows his team. He's like, I actually like how we're defending.
I think
we're just losing games 2-1.
I think you put guys and gals in tough positions to give, and this is the whole prediction game. I think when they don't watch a team all year, I think you put them in a tough position, unless you're talking to people every day. There's some who do. There's some who do. But
I think some people, Greg, are making 18 of 24 experts pick the Lightning. Why do they do that? I can't get inside their head. But if you were to ask me to try and go through their thought processes, the Lightning have improved statistically from last year. They have.
Right.
Vasilevsky's improved statistically from last year. He has. He's going to be a Vezina finalist. Bobrovsky's numbers are less impressive. Not like he hasn't had a huge drop off. I mean, he's still got a pretty good goals against average. His save percentage is over 900. And the Panthers finished 7th in team defense, and Bobrovsky played the majority of the games. But based on his year last year in the regular season, this year has been slightly less impressive. They've lost some players off their team from last year that helped them win the cup. They've had significant injuries / absences. I think people are looking at that and being like, all right, and the Lightning have home ice.
Right.
How much is this going to matter? It was important to the Lightning. I'm not sure it mattered that much to the Panthers. They've proven that they can win as the lower seeded team in playoff years, the last couple, where they've been the lower seeded team. So I think that's where it's coming from. How much of that is really based on what's going to happen in the series, though? We're going to find out in game 1 where Matthew Tkachuk's game is.
And if you believe
we're going to find out in game 3 where Aaron Ekblad's game is. We're going to find out in game 1 where Luke Glendenning's game is.
Yeah.
This is something Bobby Fenton and I talked about.
Yeah.
And Jay Richer and I talked about it too. Like, Glendening is going to play. But last year he played, and he was affected by a late season injury. He had a procedure done as soon as the playoffs ended. So he is a gamer. He's out there in practice right now, centering the 4th line. He's going to be on penalty kill. The Lightning are going to use him on those key faceoffs to the right of the goalie in the defensive zone. But if he's affected in some way by his injury and unable to do what he normally does in the faceoff circle, which is win 57% of his faceoffs, that will have an impact on the series. We don't know that yet. We're going to have to see how this unfolds when the games actually are played.
I think
which team is going to have the breakdowns like Ottawa had last night. Maybe neither one of them, but we're going to wait and see.
Out of all of the injuries that we're talking about, you mentioned Glendening, certainly there. Bjorkstrand, whenever he does come back.
Yeah.
If he does.
And he's out for the series. John Cooper announced
so
that.
he's out. And Tkachuk, for as impactful as Bjorkstrand is and could be, I think Tkachuk's, the cloudiness around his injury, even if he does play, is the biggest issue for Florida in this series. I do. Because if you do believe that report that I threw out there from LeBrun that it was a groin, that's a multiple months type injury that you need to heal from. I mean, you're not doing much. You're probably doing some rehab. You know how brutal hockey can be on the lower body. Now we're talking about the playoffs where, you're playing with such pace that a guy like that, to ask him to not, I mean, that's the other thing. Tkachuk knows only one way to play, Dave.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of, I'm going to run you, and I'm going to run you through the building, through these boards. If he can't be out there the way he typically can be out there and be physical, he might be frustrated and say, you might as well just dress somebody else at this point, depending if it's really hindering him getting up and down the ice. I think that's the biggest impact in this series for both teams, for one potential player. And so I think how Florida is able to navigate the waters when it comes to handling that injury is going to be the biggest question outside of even Glendening and Bjorkstrand for Tampa Bay. And I think that's a fair way to look at that. Goaltending, look, I think we all feel like Vasilevsky is at a very high level. I don't know if you saw, again, there was an article in the Athletic. I want to say Josh Yohe is doing some responsibilities now for the Athletic, the Penguins beat reporter. And it was something like, the rest of the league should be on notice because Vasilevsky's, if you look at his numbers this year, some of those high danger chances and goals that he didn't allow was at the best of his career. And that he is playing at a level that most goalies at his age and games played typically don't reach. Now we know the team's better in front of him. That helps. But, look, the goaltending for Florida has been good too. Is it as big a gap as it used to be when these teams played? Probably not. But I think it's fair to say Vasi comes into this game. He's healthy for the most part, obviously compared to last year. And he's playing very, very well. And that, to me, is also something to keep an eye on. This is in Toronto, where he's had some ups and downs a little bit more. He's been pretty good in this series against Florida. Let's see how that plays out. But that would be a slight advantage, maybe even more so for Tampa Bay than in Florida's corner.
Yeah.
But I'm looking at that, and I'm looking at the injury to Tkachuk, and then we can kind of get into the other finer details, of what this means. But I think those are two of the biggest storylines for me heading into this game.
Yeah.
Between these two, goaltending and Tkachuk.
I agree.
And let's kind of go from there. I know we have a few questions that are starting to trickle in, partner, that I want to get to. At Bolts Radio, if you want to get involved in the conversation, you certainly can. Andrew on Facebook says, is there a way for the Lightning power play to succeed versus Florida? Notably, this season, Florida has had their number, including 2 shorthanded goals in the 0-for-7 game. What's gone wrong?
Well, the 2 shorthanded goals came on the same penalty kill, which that was a big reason why the Lightning lost that game. That was the first meeting. I actually don't have their stats in the season series against the Panthers on the power play. But, when did they see the Panthers? Was their power play rolling? Was their power play kind of in a rut? I don't know. I mean, first of all, how many power plays are these teams going to get in a playoff series? And if they only get 1 or 2, the odds of them scoring are low. Now, I just mentioned some of these teams that have won have gone 1 for 2, 2 for 2 on the power play. Right. That is really a problem for the penalty killing team. If you're only taking 2 penalties, you can't go 0 for 2 on the penalty kill. You need to find a way to kill those penalties. Ottawa's a little different. They just took too many penalties, and also they were giving up goals right off faceoffs. So I don't know. I wouldn't read too much into the regular season in terms of what the Lightning did on the power play. Their power play may look a little different than it did in those 4 games against the Panthers. Here's what I will say, though. Both these teams are capable of scoring shorthanded, and both these teams have been burned by allowing shorthanded goals. So it's more so that they look to go on the attack. Reinhart has been a threat shorthanded for Florida, and Hagel and Cirelli have been threats, usually a duo, shorthanded for the Lightning. So the Panthers finished second in the NHL with 12 shorthanded goals scored, second to the Rangers, who led the NHL. And the Lightning were third with 11 shorthanded goals. But shorthanded goals allowed, the Lightning allowed 13, tied for first with Boston, and the Panthers allowed 10 right behind them, tied for third. So again, will that be a factor in the series? Hard to say, particularly if we have the series played mostly 5-on-5, but I would keep an eye out for that.
Yeah.
That when these teams are shorthanded, they don't just look to kill the penalty, they look to go on the attack. And they've both scored shorthanded, and they've been burned by allowing shorthanded goals against.
Yeah. I don't know. I take that back. I do think at the playoffs, you alter some things compared to what you did in the regular season. And people may say, what do you mean by that? There is a certain amount of risk that you have to take out of your game. Might not be in game 1. Sometimes you see those lopsided scores. Maybe teams are saying, let me see what I can get away with.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's part of it. You see some crooked numbers. I think for the Lightning, they understand that we're going to have to take some of the risk out of our game. And a lot of that risk comes in the power play. And look, what makes Nikita Kucherov so brilliant, and I'm focusing on him because the power play runs through him, is that sometimes you can try a cross-ice pass, a low percentage pass through 3 defenders, 45th game of the regular season, and maybe it works. I think against the Florida Panthers, it's not going to prevent Cooch from passing up a shot and finding the open man. But I think, however you want to quantify it, even the players are surrounding Cooch on the power play are going to have to simplify their game a bit more. Mm-hmm. So if Kucherov gives you a brilliant pass that not many people are going to try, I think it's going to be incumbent upon a guy like a Victor Hedman, a Braden Point, who's usually pretty good about shooting on the power play, a Jake Gensel, to not overpass. If Hetty has an opportunity off a tremendous feed from Cooch, let it fly.
Yeah.
Let it fly. And I know this is very base level stuff, but I do think if the Lightning, because the question was, what went wrong? We can go back and look at what went wrong.
Yeah.
I would kind of throw that out the window because playoff hockey, to what we have talked about before, is different. But if you're asking me what I think could be the problem, I think some of it would be, 1, getting set up, but 2, when you're in a position to shoot the puck off a feed from Kucherov, don't try and make another incredible pass for a low percentage shot. Fire away. And then you just hope that there are some rebounds and you crash the net. Kucherov's going to do what he does, and maybe he's got to simplify his game a little bit, although I don't think you want him handcuffed a ton. It's what makes him great. But I don't think every other player on that power play can perform that same way too. And so I think they need to simplify their game. Once you do get a pass from Kucherov, don't be thinking about, well, let me make another touch pass to the top of the key.
Right.
Maybe you do, but my thing would be let it rip. Let Cooch break it down. But if you got a chance to shoot, it's okay to shoot.
The fan, I think, when the fan mentioned 0-for-7, that was in that game the Lightning lost 2-1. That ended their 8-game winning streak. If I'm remembering correctly, in a number of those power play chances, they actually generated good looks. They just didn't score. And that happens sometimes. Just for the record, the Lightning also scored a shorthanded goal against the Panthers in the season series. It was Hagel. And in the 2 games the Lightning won, they did score a power play goal in each. So it's not like their power play just completely was shut down in the 4 games. We'll see. Your sentiment about not overpassing may help them on the power play, and I think it will be a key 5-on-5 as well.
Yeah.
I mean, you want to see the Lightning play a fairly straight line game, and even if that means carrying it in, it's the east-west stuff that may get them in trouble. Like an east-west pass is fine if you're certain that it's going to go through, right? Usually against strong structured teams, though, those east-west passes get disrupted, if not outright intercepted. So we'll monitor that through the series.
And I think that's a legitimate thing to follow if you're a Lightning fan. I do think the special teams, not only what the officials call and what they don't call, but how the Lightning go about attacking the Panthers and how much success or lack thereof they may have. Thaw345 says on YouTube, Tampa in 3.
Now that is a very bold prediction.
That's
what
one
we
I
were
can
talking
confidently
about
say is not
back
gonna
in the
happen.
day. Like the early rounds were 2 out of 3 in the NHL. Goodness gracious! And then for a number of years, it was 3 out of 5. That was before I got to the NHL. But I remember growing up as a kid watching those first round series. They were best of 5.
A different time.
Yeah,
as they say, a different time.
Now you got to win 4. So for a team like Ottawa that had a subpar first game, all right, the series is far from over. They have time to regroup, recover. Let's see how they bounce back in game 2 if they bounce back.
Yep. Every team is going to internalize how they need to approach this series in the first round, and working on some of the warts that may be exposed. And listen, you're not going to be able to figure it all out until, maybe you're even a game or 2 in to the series. I think the key is, not to let your weaknesses dovetail into something that ends up being a complete hindrance for your game in the series.
Yeah.
John Cooper, I think one of his great attributes has been the ability to adjust on the fly in-game. And I think the Lightning, whether it's shuffling lines, whether it's the approach that they take, should pretty quickly be able to find out what is working and what isn't against the Panthers. The good news is they've had a lot of experience playing one another, not only in the regular season, but in the postseason. There aren't many surprises in a game like this. I think you could say that maybe the Panthers have had to deal with more turnover when it comes to their roster over the last year or two, and that, kind of seeing how they react in this setting is going to be interesting. I think that is fair, but they still have, just like the Lightning, a good core in place that I think is going to demand they play a certain way. I'll tell you one player to kind of keep an eye on who I think, has the chance to be kind of a game breaker a little bit, and, for various reasons this year just wasn't, is Verhaeghe. And I think he is somebody to kind of keep an eye on. He can shoot the puck, and I think those are the guys, too, that are dangerous.
He's been a big game player for the Panthers in the playoffs. I mean, he scored plenty of overtime winners. Even going back to the year that the Lightning swept the Panthers in the first round, I think he may have had 2 overtime winners. They beat Washington in 6. For sure he had 1. Eliminated Boston in 2023 with an overtime goal. Scored against the Lightning in overtime in the series last year, in addition to just scoring big goals.
Correct. So
he has that knack, and he has had a subpar year. We talked about that.
But what have we also talked about, like with the playoffs? It's a reset.
Yeah, fresh start.
Mentally. Like Verhaeghe may look at this and say, all right, like that. I know I can score goals this regular season for whatever reason. I wasn't feeling it, and that's fine. I think there are players on the Lightning who can say that same thing. What have we said about Gergensons? Not Gergensons is in the same level as Verhaeghe. He's not. But Gergensons is probably a lot better than 3 to 4 goals a year. So
and he is going to be extremely pumped to play in his first NHL playoff game.
100%. He should be coming out flying. It'd be hard for him to sleep tonight, I would think.
Yeah.
I
would agree with that.
At Bolts Radio, if you want to get involved in the conversation, this was a good from Dusty on X. Dusty the dog. Do we have like a dog that's barking in the background, I feel like? As Dave was here working this weekend, Greg was out drinking wine.
Yes.
I mean, if you want to look at it that way, yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Doug, if that's
that is
how
true.
you really, If that's how you're going to cut it, all right.
You were just because wine people have wine to relax. You were just the calm before the storm, right?
Calm before and you notice I shave too, so I have my playoff beard full effect. You're starting today. Starts today. Now, if I let that thing grow while it's it could get a little.
You might have
control.
to sleep out on the sofa. Is that?
Yeah, maybe with wine. Yeah. Jay says Verhaeghe and Bobrovsky were noticeably worse this year than last year for the Panthers. If the Lightning can take advantage of that, I like the potential outcome. Also need the clutch time goals, which they didn't get in 2023 or 24.
Well, you were right about that, Jay, for sure. And we've talked about the big play metric, which I believe is a very important part of winning in the playoffs. It's actually staggering that the Lightning won a cup and got to a final in a 2-year span.
Yeah.
And won only one overtime game. 2021, they lost 4 games in overtime. And in 2022, they needed the win in game 6 in the first round in overtime to beat Toronto, but then they lost the 2 overtime games in the final. But you add those years together, then you throw in game 5 against Dallas in 2020, which they lost in double overtime, I believe. They lost 3 games in overtime to Toronto in 2023, and then they lost a game in overtime last year to the Panthers. I believe that's 11 of the last 12 overtime games in the playoffs they have lost. So look, usually if that happens, you're going out.
Sure.
So they were able to overcome that in 2021.
Yeah.
I don't think they lost multiple overtime games in any one of those series, though, which helped. Although I guess they would have, right? Did they lose? No, they lost one in every series. So
right.
that's kind of how you do it, right?
Yeah,
You're not
right.
losing multiple games in overtime. But the big play metric is part of that. Like, who's making the play in overtime to win a game? It can happen before overtime too.
So
I agree with you, Jay.
Do you believe
the
in the
Lightning
big play?
have not gotten that the last couple of years?
Do you believe in that clutch? A lot of people in the analytical community will kind of scoff at the clutch gene. Is there such a thing? Can you hang your hat on a guy who, man, he's always there. He always comes up bases loaded and gets a base hit.
Well, we just said that about Verhaeghe.
Yeah.
I mean, he has, I think some players do have a knack. Maybe it's the pressure, in the highest pressure situations, they keep their cool and are able to make plays.
I mean, Vasi's like that, right? I mean, how many, game clinching games where he had a shutout for a while?
When you play enough, though, and you're the goalie.
For sure.
I mean, if you lose a game, you're giving up a key goal.
But look, we were just having that conversation with Linus Ullmark.
Yeah.
I mean, his numbers have been not great in the playoffs, and it's okay. So what is it going to be?
If you're a top goalie, and let's say you've won a cup, both of these goalies have. Both of these goalies have won Vezina trophies. You're going to have some bad with the good. You just are, because you're not going to win every game. You're not going to win every playoff game. You're going to be giving up some goals. In the case of Ullmark, though, he has not really had the good in the playoffs to offset the bad.
No.
And so it's a little bit more glaring for him.
Bobrovsky, to his credit, go ahead. You were going to say.
Well, I was just going to say, I think the Lightning have some clutch players. I think Cooch is clutch. I think Point is clutch.
Yes, I would agree.
I mean, Point scored that overtime goal in Game 6 against Toronto back in 2022.
I think
the Lightning have some guys like that too.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned Bobrovsky there. And
by the way, his numbers are not. So the last thing I'll say about Jay's comment, Jay is right about Verhaeghe. He's had a huge drop off. Bobrovsky, and I was looking at this earlier because I'm like, he wasn't as good this year. His numbers are not as staggeringly worse from last year when the Panthers led the NHL in goals allowed per game. His goals against last year, 2.37. His goals against this year, 2.44. So, I mean, that's in the ballpark. His save percentage is a little bit more significantly worse. 0.915 last year, 0.906 this year. So he went down 0.09 in save percentage, and he went up 0.07 in goals against. He had 36 wins last year. He has 33 wins this year. And he has the same number of losses if you count regulation losses and overtime losses. So to me, those numbers, they are worse, but they're not significantly worse. I think he's been helped by the fact the Panthers were better defensively in the second half of the year. I just wanted to bring that up because I think those two players are in a little bit of different categories. Verhaeghe, for sure, has had a huge drop-off this year. Bobrovsky's drop-off was more moderate.
There have been a lot of great players that have come from Russia. We talked about Ovechkin and kind of where he is, obviously, with the goals. Malkin, I think, is up there. Kuch.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, where are we putting Vasi and Bobrovsky? Those are Hall of Famers.
Yeah.
I mean, 1,
yeah,
2
no doubt.
in Russian history, at least at the NHL level. I mean, that's think about that. And Bobrovsky for a while had to fight some of those,
because he hadn't had playoff success.
He hadn't had playoff success. I mean, exactly.
Until 2023, they got to the final and lost.
Correct.
But
now,
winning 3 series will help.
And beating the Lightning the year he did for Columbus helped, right? I mean, that was also one of those where you could do it.
Yeah, but that was his only playoff series win.
Correct. It was.
I mean, unless you want to count. Actually, he was gone by then because they beat Toronto in that best of 5 in the bubble. Bobrovsky was already in Florida.
Yeah.
So
it's just
until he got to Florida, he only had 1 playoff series win.
Correct.
Although, as I say that, let me just make sure that that's accurate.
But that 1 playoff series win was pretty impactful.
It was impactful, but then they lost in the next round.
They did.
And it's been the last 3 years that he's been able to rack up.
And to his credit, look, he is. If people don't think winning in the playoffs matters for individual awards or even teams, you're mistaken, because just look at Bobrovsky. I mean, it's completely has changed. I think his outlook on what his legacy will be. He's going to be a Hall of Fame goaltender.
Yes,
I don't think if he wins in Florida, there's strong resistance that he wouldn't be. And I do think winning, and people say, well, maybe he was a really good player, but if you win 2 or 3 cups, sometimes that's enough to get you over the hump to be in those conversations. And I think, Bobrovsky, to his credit, is somebody that got there. Connor on X says, what player do you guys think has the most potential in the bottom 6 to step up and do some damage this playoffs?
For the Lightning or for either team?
Let's call the Lightning first, because
Yeah, so in the bottom 6, this is configured right now. Nick Paul has the pedigree of scoring big goals in the playoffs.
That's a good one.
But I'm going to mention Gonçalves.
I was going to go there.
We talked about him over the weekend for sure. I can't remember if you and I touched on this. I think most people who are looking at the series from the outside, and again, these people apparently have picked the Lightning, but if they pick the Lightning, they're not picking the Lightning thinking, this guy might be an X factor. I think Gage Gonçalves could be an X factor. By X factor, to win a series, yes, you need a lot of things to go right. You need great goaltending. You need to be on probably the positive side of the special teams metric.
Yeah.
You need your top guys to produce. We just talked about that with some of the other series that we're looking around and seeing what's going on. But I think Gonçalves, he's playing the best hockey, I will say, in his career right now, because he's doing it at the highest level and he's playing his best hockey in the NHL. So maybe he played really, really well at points in Syracuse, but the competition was different.
Yeah.
If he can bring that into this series, he will have a chance to be a difference maker and an X factor. But those are 2 guys that I would mention. Glendening can help with those, what you called his specific skill set.
Yeah.
He can help the Lightning maybe dodge some bullets if he can win D-zone faceoffs and the Lightning can alleviate pressure.
I think that's fair. I don't think that's one of those situations. I agree with you. I think Gonçalves, look, he's going to get his taste of playoff hockey. It is different, so maybe in some ways that neutralizes what he's been able to accomplish, but his confidence should be at a pretty high level. I think the 2 players you mentioned, Paul and Gonçalves, to me, I think are the most interesting.
And I don't mean to say that to put pressure on him, not that he's listening to the show. It may be that he has what we'll call a typical first NHL playoff run, which is to say he's kind of hanging in there, right, and figuring stuff out. But I hope that he carries forward the play that we saw from him down the stretch.
That's fair. It's funny. I'm reading through some comments through The Athletic here, and a guy that I didn't even mention, partner, and I don't think you mentioned either, was Yanni Gourde, because I think some people 2-3 years ago, dial it back, would have been a guy you looked at and said
he's not in the bottom 6 now. Right?
He's not, but he's kind of like that player. But I think Gourde has the potential to make an impact in this series by just being a straight line guy and doing some of the dirty work for whoever he's playing with. And if that happens to be, Kucherov and Point, God bless him, that's an opportunity of a lifetime. Go out and handle your business. And I think he can actually have a really impactful year the way Yanni Gourde can. He's got to be excited to get back. Tomorrow, there's going to be a buzz. Now, I didn't realize tomorrow's game is going to be closer to midnight after all is said and done, partner.
Well, 8:30, but they're going to wait, I think. They want to give room for that Carolina-New Jersey game to finish. Yeah, it's going to be like an 8:50 face-off, I think Steve mentioned.
Who's actually excited about that? He just called me Phil Esposito, by the way.
You are being very sarcastic.
I'm being very sarcastic.
Greg, I think I want to do game 3. It's at 1:00, even though I said I wasn't going to travel.
I'm actually going to ask Phil if he wants to stay around and do the post game with me tomorrow. And that is a little bit unfortunate because I do think on a Tuesday night, people do have work, kids do have school.
Yeah, well.
I mean, isn't this a series you want to expose more to the league? We talk about the Four Nations tournament, and it's going to grow the game. You know what's going to grow the game even more? You put that game on at 7 o'clock where people can actually watch it with their kids, and you can see the rivalry take place. I mean, that game's not going to end until what time?
ESPN wants the triple header.
Yeah. And,
so they want the Carolina-Jersey game at 6. They want this Lightning-Panthers game 8:30-ish, but later. And then there's an 11, right? Vegas? Is it Vegas? Yeah, Vegas, Minnesota, which that game won't start. Yeah. That'll be 8 o'clock Vegas time. But, I mean, if they're going to wait a full, 2.5 hours plus, it's going to be well after 11.
Yes.
That game starts.
I understand TV rules, so it's irrelevant here. I'm just telling you, be smart. You want to grow the game. Mm-hmm. This has gotten to a beautiful place, Tampa Bay and Florida. You got what you wanted.
Well, it's the game 1. I mean, game 2 is going to be 6:30 face-off.
Yeah.
And then they have the primo afternoon slot for game 3.
Game 1.
Yeah.
Here's a better question. Parents out there, are you going to let your kids stay up and watch the whole game and then call them off the next day at school?
By the way, we didn't really touch on Carolina, New Jersey, or the other game that was played last night, which was Vegas, Minnesota.
New Jersey misses Hughes, don't they?
Oh, my gosh. And they had some injuries yesterday, too. I don't know how significant they are, but they affected them in-game.
Yeah.
Through 2 periods. Was this a Carolina Hurricanes type of game? If the Hurricanes could script a game, how, letter to the law, would they script it this way? Through 2 periods, shots were 38-13 Carolina, and they were up 3-1 because the Devils scored a late second period goal.
Yeah.
38-13 were the shots. The Devils leveled out a little bit in the third, but they didn't get any goals. So the Hurricanes had an empty netter to win 4-1. That is a series where that dynamic is going to have to change. That was basically Carolina's we're going to write a script for game 1. This is exactly how it's going to go. We're going to score early. We're going to get a multi-goal lead, and we are just going to dominate possession and suffocate the other team. Second period, the period of the long change, shots in the second period, 21-8.
Yeah.
Carolina. You can just sense
I want to say
that whole period was played in the New Jersey end.
From what I read, again, I didn't watch it. From what I read, it sounded like in the second or third period, New Jersey they changed up the lines and the shot started to go a little more even. But how much of that was maybe Carolina? Yeah. But how much of that is Carolina maybe not forcing the issue as much?
Up 3-1 in the third, they did what they needed to do to lock it down and get a game 1 win.
That may be a short series. That may be one of those series you look at and just say, New Jersey you lose Hughes. It sounds like they don't maybe have enough oomph to play. I mean, Carolina just might be a bad matchup for them. That's the other thing. By the way,
well, and they had some injuries in game 1. How
Yeah,
significant are they going to
for
be?
sure.
Who knows?
really fascinating story on their GM, like where he came from, the analytical field, no
Mhm.
hockey experience, and the way they kind of
You're talking
went
about
after
Carolina.
the
Yeah.
players that they wanted, and really just bringing in. You want to talk about analytics? It's almost like analytics on steroids. Really fascinating story. I was up because the baby was up, and so I happened to read the article, and I was like,
Yeah.
"This game, you would have never seen something like this 25 years ago. You really wouldn't."
Yeah.
But for Carolina, it's been very good. So that's kind of where we are. We will
Mhm.
be talking about this tomorrow, getting you ready for the game at midnight. Now I take
Yes.
that back.
We are still on at noon.
We are gonna be
not
on at noon.
starting late.
We are going to be on at noon.
I can tell you
And-
right now because I write my extra shift after the game. I mean, at some point after. Sometimes it's directly after the game. Sometimes it's the next morning.
Right.
That will be written on Wednesday morning. I am not going to be staying up
Usually can knock
unless
those out
I
pretty
have
good, though.
insomnia.
Yeah.
My insomnia is not baby-induced insomnia,
No.
unlike yours.
But you might have
But
so much adrenaline going, partner. You may be able to knock that out.
I don't
tomorrow
know.
night. You know, get some coffee. You know,
My wife and daughter have a commitment on Tuesday night because usually, they would be coming to the playoff games.
Sure.
And the schedule came out and they're like, we have a commitment.
Yeah.
They're like, the commitment actually ends around the time the game is started. It's like, maybe we'll come to the game.
maybe we can come
this
after all.
commitment.
Yeah,
I don't
why
know.
not?
That's up
Why
to
not?
them.
Yeah,
My daughter has school. My wife has work on Wednesday.
Gotcha.
Though, so we'll see. We'll see what they
you'll be
decide
there
to do.
though, regardless.
I will be there. That's
And that'll be
my
fun.
work.
That's
so
your work.
I just got to make sure I'm up Wednesday to
Yeah.
be able to do the show with you
That's
and
true.
write this game 1 recap.
We'll go live on Wednesday.
I think we're going live on
We'll go
Wednesday
live
for
on
sure. Yeah. It'll be interesting
Uh,
to see if both teams take advantage of practice
That's
on
true.
Wednesday or just
Yeah.
give the teams the
Good
day
point.
off, the players the day off.
Good point. So they can drink wine.
Yes.
That's what Doug wanted me to do. All right, we'll be at it again tomorrow. It's great catching up with you today. Thanks
Yep,
everybody. Who chimed
absolutely.
in. Thanks to Steve Ersnick and Jarrett Johnson. We appreciate you guys as always. Playoff hockey begins tomorrow night here in Tampa. You can listen to it all right here on Lightning Radio.